Alright, hey guys, so like a doofus, I completely forgot to record the class today. So I didn't want to just like leave you hanging, so I kind of want to just spend a few minutes talking about some of the major ideas that we talked about in class. Luckily, we did have the quiz today in class, so that took up probably 20 minutes. And then we did have a lot of time of students working on the exercises, and so that took up a lot of time as well. So there shouldn't be a ton of info here, but I did want to make sure that you had something. And so we had picked up kind of where we left off with this fitness data. And so we were talking about scatter plots. We had done this example with the presidential election, which was pretty cool, with that butterfly ballot, which kind of swayed, or some people at least say swayed, the results of the 2000 presidential election. For the fitness data, it actually comes from myself, and so it's collected from my Apple Watch, and I have it going since November 2018, and it ends in about July, so I haven't updated it since July of 2020. And so it's got a bunch of variables: the day, the month, weekday, the day of the year, the amount of distance I've walked in miles, the number of steps I took that day, the number of flights of stairs I climbed that day, this mysterious active calories thing that Apple has that who knows what it actually means, and then a couple of other things. So you could start by just reading in the data. Again, we haven't talked about reading in data explicitly yet, so you could just run the line and just realize that we're naming our data set fitness. A bit of review from last time: when we make a scatter plot, we have to provide ggplot a few different things. So we have to give it the name of our data set. We have to give it aesthetics. And how you know which aesthetics you need, you could either use Google or you could rely on this cheat sheet. And so aesthetics, I'm looking at G on point, which I see makes this scatter plot. Looks like the aesthetics that are optional are X, Y, alpha, color, fill, shape, and size. So we'll cover all those in a bit. But the two that it really needs are an X and Y to kind of map things to the X axis and to the Y axis. And so if you run that, you'll kind of get this scatter plot. One kind of really important thing that we talked about in class was the importance of plotting your data always. And so you should usually plot your data before you do anything else. So before you get summary stats, before you get, before you would fit a linear regression model or any sort of model, you'd want to plot your data. This is a good example why, because you might notice some strange patterns in the scatter plot that you made, or some strange observations. In particular, it looks like there's a bunch of days that have 0 active calories. And so these are days where maybe I didn't wear my Apple Watch, and so I have 0 active calories and walked 0 miles. We'd probably want to get rid of those days. These other days where I did walk some distance but somehow didn't burn any calories are probably recording errors, so we could probably safely get rid of those as well. Either way, we could get rid of them with this next code chunk, which again, we haven't talked about this filter function yet. We'll talk about it next week. So just run the line, make the plot again, and realize that those points are gone, so it did what we wanted to, and we could kind of move on. Okay, So I think the big idea from this video has to do with these aesthetics that we're using for ggplot. It does matter where you put the aesthetics, and so you could put them in geom_point like we did here, or you could make the equivalent graph by putting them in ggplot as a whole. So it made the same exact graph. Why this is important is that if you put them in ggplot, this is what's kind of known as specifying aesthetics globally. And by that, we mean that the aesthetics, if they're specified globally, they're perpetuated through all geoms. And so even if we had other geoms that we keep adding after geom_point, they would all inherit these aesthetics. On the other hand, if you specify the aesthetics in geom_point, this is what's kind of known as specifying aesthetics locally. And so for the local specification, if we keep on adding geoms, then we need to re-specify those aesthetics. And so having this control over global aesthetics versus local aesthetics is going to allow us to be super flexible. You'll see an exercise that I won't cover here because it's one of the ones that has a solution given. But an exercise will really help make this clear. In particular, it's in section B, exercise 2. There's a bunch of other aesthetics. We talked about some of them in class. You could just kind of mess around with them a little bit. And so there's color, where you could change the color of points by a variable in the data set, in this case weekend indicator, which is, it looks like it's coloring red for days that are weekdays, blue for days that are weekends. You could also change the size aesthetic. It doesn't really make much sense to use here, and R even gives you a warning that using size for a discrete variable is not advised. It just makes one of the categories very big and the other very small. So not really that useful, but we see what the size aesthetic does. And then there's a shape aesthetic that you could mess around with too. This might be useful if you're if you know you're printing in black and white, then the weekends get triangles and the weekdays get circles. I generally don't really like the shape aesthetic because I still think it's hard to read, but it's there. And so the last kind of topic for this video is what goes inside the aesthetic function and what goes outside. And so if you've had Stat 213, you might kind of be familiar with this a little bit. But if not, pretty much the idea is that we want to map stuff that is in our data set to be inside the aesthetic function, and stuff that isn't in our data set we want to go outside the aesthetics. We could see this clearly with this example. Here we're trying to color all of the points purple by specifying color equals purple. But it doesn't really do what you'd expect. It kind of makes this, what it's really doing is defining a new variable called color, and for every observation in the data set, it's making that new variable purple. And then it's coloring by its default color, which isn't really making any sense. And so purple really isn't a part of our data set. It's not a variable like active calories or start date are. And so if we want to change it so that all of the points are colored purple, we just need to make sure color goes outside the aesthetics by closing the aesthetic parentheses there and then getting rid of a parenthesis at the end. This then colors all of the points purple, doing what we would expect. And so other things that you might put outside the aesthetics are if you wanted to just like make the points bigger by maybe making them twice as big as they normally are, you could specify size equals 2. That has nothing to do with variables in our data set, so it goes outside the aesthetics. We'll make the size a little bigger so it's more obvious. So maybe size equals 3. Now the points are super, super big. Okay. And so we stopped here at this using more than one geom. And so you could go ahead and stop there. For Monday, you'll finish this tutorial kind of on your own. So you'll work through the rest of this on your own, whether you're in person or remote or whatever. And so there's not that much left. I guess there's a decent amount left. And so you'll finish that. For the exercises, like I mentioned before, a lot of the class time was spent with students working on exercises in pairs. And so you'd want to pick up wherever you left off from last time. In class, we got through this exercise 2 of section B. But before Monday, you should complete the rest of the exercises for section B as well as all of the exercises for section C. You can stop here at the class exercises. So on Monday, this is what we'll pick up as a class, is doing these class exercises together. Okay, cool. So, as always, let me know if you have any questions. I hope this makes up for not recording earlier. A silly mistake by me, but I definitely wanted to give you some sort of video to kind of work through in case you learn best by videos. All right, hope you have a great morning, afternoon, evening, or whatever time of day you're watching this video.